Hey guys, my name is Anthony and in today's video I'm going to be talking over TSRL round 11 at Austria. So if you want to see more videos similar to this, make sure to click the link at the top right hand side of the screen and it will take you to a playlist of all the league racing highlight videos that I've done up until now, so that you can see the progression that I've made throughout this season, because at the beginning of the season I wasn't doing all that well and recently I've been doing a lot better than I was at the beginning. So going into this one, obviously I did the race at WOR, so I at least had some race practice. But moving on to qualifying, it was a similar story to WOR. In practice, I was doing okay in the quali sessions, but when it came to the actual quali sessions, I just couldn't pull the laps in. As you can see, going into turn 5, we just go wide, and it's not really been a great quali session for us. In practice, the quickest I've gone is a 1 minute 2.7, so honestly, we're not doing that great considering we're almost a second behind. But moving on to this lap, which was the fastest lap that we did, braking at the 100-meter board, we could have taken a lot more curb than that. We could have gained at least a tenth and a half just by taking all the curb going into that corner, as we get a little bit of a slipstream from our teammate, which it helped, but it wasn't really that much of a help because we just personally wasn't driving that well. The goal was to get pole in this, and we could have gotten pole if I had managed to pull a decent lap out of the bag here. But let's see what we end up getting. So braking into turn 4, it was a decent-ish exit, but as you can see going into turn 5, you'll just see I'm just a lot more cautious going into the corner because of what happened before when we ended up going wide. We just didn't use nearly as much of the track as we should have going into those two left-handers there. And then coming up to the final corner, it's the same story really. We were just cautious because honestly I just wanted to get a decent lap time in. And as we come up to the final corner, we ride the curb a little bit too much and lose a little bit of speed going off the exit, and we do a 1 minute 3.2, which puts us in 4th place at the time. However, someone did end up improving and we got moved down into 5th place. So not the greatest qualifying, but luckily, you know, it's the race that really counts. So moving on to the actual race now, we're doing another soft to medium strategy, and I believe we have about 2.6 laps of extra fuel because you use a lot of fuel at Austria. So we've got 5 lights and away we go. At this point, I just wanted to try and make up as many positions in the opening laps as I can, as Harv is on the inside line there, as he takes a little bit too much curb and he has a pretty poor exit. We managed to get the move on him, but Harv is actually going to fight this position here as we go up to turn 3. You can see we're side by side, braking at the 100-meter board, both of us. I decided to just back out of it because I didn't really want to go into turn 3 side by side, because usually if you're on the left hand side going into turn 3, you're probably going to end up getting pushed off the track, and I was going to lose a lot of positions by that. So I decided to take the decision to just back out of the move and keep our current position instead of battling with Harv and potentially losing positions. But I knew that I was going to make the overtake as soon as possible on Harv because I wanted to get up the field as soon as possible and try and lead this race going into the wet conditions, because it is going to be raining towards the end of the race. In fact, I believe it started raining halfway through this race. So for most of the race we were in wet conditions, and I wanted to be as close to the lead as possible going into those conditions. So as we move on to lap 3 now, this is when we finally get a good move on Harv here. Breaking down into turn 4, I knew I had to make the move here because if I didn't, I was going to lose too much time to the guys ahead, because you can see that Joseph and Artem are already outside of the DRS for Harv. So I needed to do a lot of work to catch up to them. I believe we've still got about 50 to 60% ERS, so I knew I had to use quite a bit of ERS if I wanted to make it into the DRS of those two, and I did use quite a bit of ERS. We used about 20%, and a couple of laps later we end up catching up and getting into the DRS of both Artem and Joseph, because they were battling really hard at this point, and I'm assuming that they had the same decisions as me basically, where they wanted to be in the lead going into the wet conditions. But as we come up to the DRS zone now, I go left, Joseph goes right, and we are 3 wide going into turn 4, and this just shows, you know, just how good some of the drivers in this league are. You know, we could have easily bottled it and had all 3 of us just spin out and let Harv basically take the lead, but luckily all of us were pretty clean going into turn 4, and we managed to make the move on Artem, and Joseph makes the move on both of us. And at this point, once again, just wanted to try and get myself into the lead of the race going into wet conditions, so I knew that I was going to need to overtake Joseph if I wanted to do that. And we still had quite a lot of ERS to play with here, so I knew that it was going to be a simple move if I could just keep inside the DRS. What really mattered is whether I could use the ERS after I'd overtaken Joseph to really push and get outside of his DRS so that he couldn't be dragged along by me. So as we go on to lap 7 now at the first DRS zone, make the overtake happen. And I probably shouldn't have used ERS at that point to make that overtake, because once again, once you've made the overtake, that's when the difficult part starts. That's when you need to start using the ERS to get out of the DRS of the person behind you, or else they're just going to end up overtaking you, which is exactly what happens to us here as Joseph makes the move going into turn 4. So once again, it's at that point where we were both clean enough not to just smash into each other and ruin each other's races, so I decided to just let him by. There's no point in trying to fight going through the second sector here, because one of us is either gonna come off of the track or we're just gonna lose so much time to the guys behind us, and that's not exactly what you really want at that point. So moving all the way to lap 15, this is when it starts to rain. I believe it started to rain exactly on lap 14, but I decided to skip to lap 15 because this is when we decided to pit. Because if you didn't see my video previously on TSRL Limitless, I was basically talking about how to transition into wet conditions, and one of the things I said is to look at the delta. And if you look at our delta, you can see by the time we made it to sector 2, we were 5 seconds slower than our previous lap. So I knew at that point instantly that it was too wet for the slick tires and that we needed to jump into the pits for the intermediate tires. So that's exactly what we do, and Artem realized the same thing as he jumps into the pits. And as we go into the pits, we brake and we almost smash into the back of him, but crucially we didn't speed into the pit lanes like we did in W or R. So we head into the pits, grab the intermediate tires, and at this point I just wanted to catch up to Artem, but I knew that he had a setup built for wet conditions, whereas the setup I was using for this race was dry conditions, because, well, actually I don't really know why I was using one more suited to dry conditions, but either way we were using a setup that was more suited for the dry conditions. And even though we were using a setup that gave us a disadvantage the wetter it got, we showed some pretty consistent pace. As you can see right now, we're about 1.1 seconds behind Artem on lap 21, and we're about 3 seconds ahead of Joseph by that point. And as we move on to lap 24, you can see now we're still about 4 seconds ahead of Joseph, and we're still within that 1.1 second gap to Artem, and we just showed our pace. Me and Artem were quicker than everyone else on the track, and we move on to lap 26, and it showed, because by this point now, just 2 laps later, we were both 10 seconds ahead of the guys behind, and I actually had made it into the DRS essentially of Artem, but you know, that gap sort of stabilized around about the 9/10 to 1.1 second mark, and it was because he had a setup that was more suited to wet conditions. So as the track got wetter and wetter, I struggled a lot more. As you can see, coming off of turn 3, the car was a little bit skirmish and I almost lost it at that point. Moving on to lap 31 now, we're still around a 1.1 second mark, and we're about 12 seconds ahead of the guys behind us. And at this point I thought to myself, I've got a 3-second time penalty, Artem doesn't have any penalties, and it's a lot harder to get penalties and warnings in wet conditions. So I knew that as the track was getting wetter and wetter, we were going to lose a lot more time to him, and second place was probably where we were going to finish. And by the time that we made it to lap 36 now, we're still about 1.9 seconds behind, so we did make up a little bit of time after we had lost some time as the track was getting wetter. But at this point I had already accepted that we were going to be finishing once again at Austria in P2, because the last time that we raced at Austria before WOR earlier on that week was on F1 2019, and that is where I collected my very first podium, and we finished in second place. So it seems as if at Austria we are doomed to finish in second place, as we passed Dylan World. I think that was his first race for this tier in this league, and he didn't really have a great race. I think he got wing damage pretty early on, so kind of felt bad for him considering it was his debut. But as we come up to the final couple of corners on the track now, we are roughly 2.5 seconds behind Artem, as he was just super quick in wet conditions, and we did lose a little bit of time to the guys behind us, but they were still about 8 to 10 seconds behind us at this point. So even though we were struggling as the track got wetter, we were still driving really well. As we come up to the final corner now, as Artem ends up winning the race by 2.5 seconds to ourselves, who finishes in P2, which was a very good result for us considering that we were getting slower and slower as the track got wetter. I do feel that if we had pushed a little bit more in dry conditions, we could have made up the time that could have made the difference, and maybe we could have won the race. Or if I had used a setup that was more suited to wet conditions, then we could have probably won the race because we would have been a little bit faster. But that doesn't diminish the performance that Artem put in. He was driving really well, and there's not really much else we could have done at that point. So that's going to be it from me in today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button and stick around by subscribing to the channel if you're new, and make sure to follow me on Twitter or join my Discord server. Both links will be in the description below, and I'll see you guys in my next video.